Right, it's coming up to 4:05. We're running slightly late today at today's Transport Technology Forum poolside chat. I'm delighted to welcome you. I'm Steve Gooding. I'm the chair of the Transport Technology Forum, and I think we've got an interesting conversation lined up for you this afternoon. Except I think we are having some of those traditional, we've been doing this for 16 months now, and now the system starts to play up moments with the technology. So variously, our speakers are trying to join by various means, and I'm not convinced they're all going to make it, but hopefully we will be hearing from Mira Nayar at the Department for Transport, who's been the guiding light on creating the new bus open data system that the department has got up and running now, which I think is really interesting. We'll be hearing from Claire Walters, whatever it says at the bottom of her picture, it's Claire Walters, who's the CEO of Bus Users UK, who could be saying, I hope, something about what bus users are benefiting from with this new approach to data being derived from the operation of real-time data. And then a man who needs no introduction from me in the TTF, a man who's consistently be found poolside with merguez sausages and a bottle of beer, your own Andy Graham, talking to us about the thing I think that is interesting for the TTF, which is what you can do with data derived from real-time bus operations that isn't just about buses. So we'll be hearing from Andy as well shortly. Now, we were going to start off, I think, with Mira explaining what it is that she's FT, what the data is that they've generated, how that's going. And it wasn't that long ago, actually, that Mira was on the line. I'm not quite sure where she's disappeared to. I'm looking in the chat to see if anyone has heard sight or sound of her. But if we haven't got Mira straight away, and if Claire is there, and there's Claire, masquerading as Paul Hutton, but looking much nicer. I'm going to turn to Claire to do her bit, which will cause Andy some grief because he'll have to click through to Claire's slides first. So Andy can do that, and Claire's going to talk to us about the bus user perspective, and then hopefully we'll be able to get Mira in to go back over what the new service is about. So Claire, could you say a bit about yourself and Bus Users UK and introduce yourselves to the Transport Technology Forum?
Of course I can. Apologies that I'm neither Paul Hutton nor Mira Nayar, but let's just pass on quickly from that. My name's Claire Walters. I'm the CEO of Bus Users UK, and I've been there for 9 years now, and we've kind of morphed from being a pure passenger problem solver to being a charity based on access and inclusion through transport. So obviously the thing I wanted to focus on today was the whole point about access and how technology, while it can make things much, much better, also isn't always the answer to everything. So obviously in terms of bus better, it's great having a bigger focus on bus and coach travel. It's very welcome, very important, and overdue. It is, as you know, the most used form of public transport there is. I mean, even in London, twice as many people pre-pandemic went to work by bus as on the train and underground combined. So let's not underestimate its critical role in life for everyone. I wanted to talk about technology in terms of accessibility. Clearly, there are lots of opportunities where more technology makes a lot more access for people. But there are a number of aspects which need careful consideration before throwing ourselves headfirst at all available techie options as the answer to everything. Next slide, please. Now, we all know that people need transport to get to education, to get to employment, to medical appointments, to go shopping and undertake all sorts of leisure activities. So its social value is undisputable. If you've got a disability or a learning difficulty, you can, of course, end up in a vicious cycle of lower income, and financial exclusion often leads to digital exclusion. And we need to be sure that all those problems don't end up with people not being able to access public transport. This isn't a small scale problem either. As you can see by these statistics, they're just a drop in the ocean in the much bigger picture. Sorry, my teeth are obviously someone else's today. So the Digital Consumer Index 2020 reported that 9 million people in the UK are unable to use the internet and associated devices by themselves. That accounts for 16% of adults in the UK. Next slide, please. So let's move on to financial barriers. I mean, nobody uses cash anymore, right? Well, wrong. We still have over 1 million people without any form of bank or e-money accounts. We also have 7.5 million people with basic bank accounts, most of which still don't have the kind of smart cards that the rest of us use without thinking, really. The whole contactless stuff is just the norm for a lot of us. Nearly 5% of younger people who are regular users of public transport don't have any way of paying by contactless or by buying online tickets. And there are over 5 million people in the UK who rely on cash for all their transactions. But didn't COVID change all that, I hear you say? No, the Retailing Index just reported in June this year that cash volumes currently being spent are now exceeding 70% of pre-lockdown levels. So it's not a small problem. The next slide, please. But everybody's got internet access now, more or less, yes? Well, again, sorry, no. About 28 million households in the UK. So 6% of them have no access. That's just under 1.7 million households without any access at all to the internet, at school, at work, anywhere. So what about mobile phones? Everybody's got a mobile phone. But no, again, you're looking at 12 million people with no mobile. And 16% of lower income younger people, 18 to 24, don't have a smartphone. It's not just a case of giving people free computers or internet access either. What might shock those of us that are used to using tech all the time is that 48% of those who are currently offline say that nothing in the world would get them online, even if you gave it to them for naught. So technology can help with all sorts of accessibility issues, and I'm absolutely no Luddite, but I think it's really important to recognise that the fast pace of technology can leave an awful lot of humans behind, especially if you don't include them in the conversations at an early stage. Next slide, please. This quote from an IDS report in 2018 summed up the dilemma rather neatly, I think. We have to remember that the word bus is short for omnibus, which means the bus is for everyone. So if we're not making the bus a space for everyone who might want to travel, and the ticketing and the planning isn't accessible to everyone, it's not a bus. Slide 6, please, last slide. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions at the point that you want us to do that.
Be the first person to say my mic is on mute. I've taken it off now. Thanks very much, Claire. We're going to take a moment or two to see if we can get Mira up with us and to talk about her slides. So it just strikes me, we could put a couple of questions to you first up to get us going, Claire. And I guess I definitely recognise the idea of the bus being the omnibus and the vehicle for all. In terms of the technologies coming through, things like being able to see whether the bus is on time, what are the facilities that you think the less mobile amongst us would really find helpful? I mean, is it knowing when the bus is coming? Is it knowing whether the bus is accessible? Is it knowing, for example, if it's wheelchair accessible, but it's already got the wheelchair spaces? Have you a sense of what the next steps would most usefully be?
Okay, sorry about that. All of the above, really. I think the problem is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone. The vexed question of whether the wheelchair space is occupied has been exercising people's brains for quite a long time throughout the industry. I know, because we've been banging the table about this for quite a while. And in COVID, there were all sorts of seat booking type initiatives coming up. And people were very concerned about the fact that people will insist on booking seats and that not turning up for them, as you've seen countless restaurateurs tearing their hair out. So they're kind of concerned about their equality duty. If somebody's got the seat, the space booked 2 stops further down, and a wheelchair user turns up and says, well, it's empty, why can't I come on it? And they're worried about the conflict that could occur in that, despite all the other conflicts about other people wanting to use that space for standing, luggage, buggies, whatever. So there's a design issue there, really, that needs to come into play alongside a data issue. People do want to know when the bus is coming, but I mean, we don't have an awful lot of places where they've got real-time information on every bus stop. I mean, where I live in London, we don't have real-time information at every bus stop. We did have, and then they took half of it out. Who knew? I can't imagine why, but obviously there was a reason. And the further out of the urban conurbations you go, the less likely you are to have that sort of stuff at every bus stop. I mean, it can be done in town centres. Obviously, you can get supermarkets to have bus information as you leave, so it's not on the street and less liable to vandalism. But it doesn't help if the shop shuts at 6 o'clock and you're trying to get home after the pub shuts, which disabled people and older people are allowed to do, I'm told. I'm not very good at going out late at night to the pub, but that's me. And the pub's very grateful. But however, I think you need to ask the people that are using your buses what would make sense for them. And then the other problem is you need to ask the people who aren't using your buses, and that's more difficult to get to those. But it's not impossible. And if you look at people like Blackpool, Transport, Brighton and Hove, part of the Go Ahead group, you look at the way they've addressed this problem. They've engaged with their own community and basically invited everybody to tell them what they're doing wrong, which is a pretty scary thing for anybody to do about their business. But it's been a remarkable success for both of those. And they've formed relationships with organisations that are not afraid to give them a very honest set of feedback on some of the things that they try. But it's very challenging for the engineers involved in design. It's very challenging when you try and go and buy a bus that meets that spec, because they don't listen to consumers. They're not there for that. Their customer is the bus company. So the bus company has to specify it. And if all the bus companies are buying different things and wanting different things, then it starts getting quite expensive. So actually, we need to bring the manufacturers into those conversations at a much earlier stage, the ones we can.
That's a really good point. And particularly, I'm thinking some years ago, I went to the Bus and Coach show, the National Exhibition Centre. Delegates to this event will know my life is all glamour. Anyway, the notable thing which someone pointed out to me is if you look at a bus operator or a coach operator going to check out one of the new vehicles that was on show, most of them hopped into the driving seat. Now, of course, should be really concerned about how well the vehicle's designed for the driver, but it was less clear quite how many of them got out of the driving seat and went to experience what life was like back where the passengers were going to go. So yes, bringing them into the conversation and having a bigger conversation is one of the things that in TTF we've been really interested in. What I'm going to suggest, since we're still having those technical problems with Mira, is that I ask the team to pull up Mira's slides, and then I'm just going to have a little go about providing some backdrop to them. But I think it is important that we get at least something of what DFT, what Mira has been up to on the open data. And then if through the magic of the internet, Mira can see them and we can hear her voice, she can correct me on what I get wrong. So let's have a look at her slides. Is someone able to put those back up on screen?
Well, thanks everyone for being patient. And apologies for the technical glitches. Apparently the FT systems do not collaborate well with GoToWebinar, but we're here. So we'd really like to talk to you a little bit about the work we've been doing on open buses, and in particular how we'll be taking forward the data ticketing and technology commitments in the National Bus Strategy, and really what that means for an increasingly digitally transformed bus, and more than just bus, actually public transport and highways as well, and so just the better delivery of public transport and management of roads. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Open Buses programme, so this all started off many years ago. It was Stephen Fiddler's brainchild. So in making the bus services Act back in 2017, there was a view that the issues that we were experiencing in the bus industry in terms of declining patronage could at the very least in part be solved or resolved through digital transformation, and in particular enabling the bus industry to become increasingly digitally and data literate. And so the key idea was that if bus operators were required to openly publish data about their bus services, so their timetables, their fares, their location data, that would make it much easier for the big app developers, the Googles, the city mappers of the world, to go and take their product that they've successfully launched in London and actually successfully launched that in other major regions across the country, and just make it much easier for people to use public transport. For those of us who do live in London, we'll know and hopefully appreciate the privileges that we have in terms of the public transport system and the ease of navigation, because all of our journeys can be easily planned on Google, on bus times, on City Map, or whatever the app is that you choose. But if you have the opportunity to travel on public transport outside of London, what you will realise is that experience is not always consistently replicated, and that fundamentally boils down to the app developers just not having access to the data. So in the last few years, we have made new legislation, new regulations to legally require all bus operators across England of local bus services to openly publish timetable, fares and location data. We have made new data standards and new data standard profiles to increasingly standardise the data that the operators now legally have to publish, so that data can very easily then be used by app developers. We've actually built new software, so we've given the bus operators software to help them create that data, because for some of them, the reason they weren't publishing the data was because they just couldn't create it digitally. So they were still working on spreadsheets or on paper and pencil format. We've also built a new digital service to enable the bus operators to very easily publish that data, and then to also enable the app developers to very easily find that data as well. And so we're kind of now transitioning into this space of benefits realisation. And so one of the really kind of exciting developments has been, primarily we're quite focused on working with the app developers to help them get the data into their apps. So for example, City Mapper have been launching their app across most of the other major regions across the country, and are now ingesting our data, which is great. But actually, middle of last year, we started building a new service called the Analyze Bus Data Service, which actually took this data, this location data that was being made openly available as a result of our regulations, and start to convert it into intelligence for local authorities, and also for the regulators and for the bus operators to optimise the delivery of public transport. So these are almost like secondary benefits. They weren't, there was a primary intention to enable people to be able to journey plan, but then there have been all of these secondary benefits that we're starting to realise that are digitally transforming the process of government as well. So it's a really, a genuinely very exciting programme. been a real privilege to take it forward. And this is genuinely one of the most exciting times we could be in, really, as we start to see how BODS data is changing the bus industry and increasingly not just bus but public transport and highways as well. So we're still on the first slide, and so just to summarise in terms of our vision, there were 3 main objectives. The first one was about improving passenger journeys. So this is about getting the data into journey planning apps like Citymapper and making it much easier for people to use public transport in a seamless, integrated way. So inherently public transport is quite a fragmented network, but you can join it up through journey planning and through ticketing, and that's what we are seeking to do. The second kind of part of the vision was about, I suppose, really digitally transforming the process of government, and so digitally transforming activities of the regulators, of the local authorities by helping them use this data as intelligence. And then the third component has been really kind of setting the foundations for an open transport initiative in the future. So really going beyond bus and looking at the whole public transport network and thinking about how we integrate it through journey planning and ticketing. So this is really kind of a foundation layer, if anything. If we could move to the next slide, please. So just in terms of some of the benefits of the programme, so for passengers, so we've touched a little bit on the importance of a seamless travel experience. People will make the switch from private to public transport, and I realise we've got some real raised advocates and car advocates on the call, but I think increasingly, what we're starting to see is that we do need green cars, green electric vehicles, but we also just need to change our travel behaviour and our citizens. And really, government has a responsibility to nudge that behaviour, and people will make that shift from private to public transport if they feel that they can complete their end-to-end journey on public transport, and that they don't feel that they will be penalised as a result of that, so they don't think that journey is going to take them longer or it's going to be more complicated. And so as soon as you start to help them stitch together the kind of the public transport journey through journey planners, all of a sudden it just becomes natural choice. And for bus operators, the key benefit is, for years we've had this falling demand for bus patterns, but actually bus and rail are the 2 major modes of public transport, rail being the mode that connects, drives intercity travel, and bus being the mode that supports intra-city or local travel. And so the decline in patronage, we feel is reversible, and that is really what the National Bus Strategy sets out to do. And the experience in London has certainly been that, when TfL took their policy decisions to open up their data, and to support developers to use that data in products and apps through the London data store, the data came, and then eventually the developers came, and then eventually the passengers came, and that's what we're expecting to see in London, in the rest of the country now. And that will benefit bus operators in terms of, hopefully in the longer term, increasing their patronage and potentially their revenue as well. Local authorities have increasingly got stretching targets around net zero and around decarbonisation. They need their citizens to make that switch to public transport, and data and digital tooling is key to enabling better management of their highways, of their public transport networks. And so we do think there's a real benefit for local authorities. And for the tech companies, it's genuinely so exciting to work with so many tech companies who, only this morning we were talking to one scheduling software company who, and they were talking about some of their new product releases based on BODS data, and, we just get such a kick out of it. It's really great to hear that, there's lots of things that we're centralising and delivering via government, but there's also lots of opportunities that have been created in the distributed marketplace. And we think that's great for the economy, as well as being great for the public transport industry, and ultimately great for passengers and citizens. And then, at the end of it all, you've got central government. So you've got the people here who wanted to make primary legislation, and fundamentally, at the heart of it all is transport decarbonisation. The thing that always staggers me, without being critical of transport, is in the last 3 decades, our greenhouse gas emissions have dropped by 43%. The energy sector and BEIS have really led the way in terms of those reductions. In transport, we've only reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 3% in 3 decades. That's 1% a decade. And that, fundamentally says to me that we need to change our thinking. We need to do something differently. And I do really think that public transport is key. But people increasingly consume things via their phones. And Claire is absolutely right in the point that she makes that not everybody has access to a phone, but increasingly, digital technologies are a massive enabler for Joe Public and also those people with accessibility needs as well. And so making sure that public transport can be consumed via your mobile phone, I think, key to getting the next generation using public transport as their default mode of choice. Next slide, please. So just looking at the next slide, so just really starting to make that connection between the National Bus Strategy and open buses. I think at the heart of the National Bus Strategy, back in 2017, the Bus Services Act was made. Fundamentally, what it did was create opportunities for local authorities and bus operators to more effectively partner to deliver better bus services, because we knew and we could see that where bus services were delivered effectively and where people actually used them were the areas where the bus operators and local authorities had good working relationships and were effectively partnering. Franchising and enhanced partnership is probably the 2 main partnership frameworks that were provided through the Bus Services Act. And it takes time for change to be embedded, but what the National Bus Strategy really does is look to implement what has been enabled via the Bus Services Act. So now we're in this world where most local transport authorities across the country have now stated their intention to create an enhanced partnership. And as part of that, they will need to provide bus service improvement plans that set out how they will partner with their bus operators to deliver better bus services, and that will shape their access to funding. And that funding will then in turn enable them to deliver their visions as communicated in their BSIP. Through the Open Buses programme, there are lots of, data ticketing technology commitments that we think are integral or key to that vision. So in particular, from a data perspective, fundamentally, we want to see greater integration of public transport. So that involves bringing bus and rail together and making it easier for the bus and rail operators to partner on service planning, on network planning and on timetabling, so improving the communication, the coordination of those services. From a ticketing perspective, one of the things that really staggers me still is that from a ticketing perspective, only in London do we have multimodal contactless CAP ticketing that's available on a daily and a weekly basis. So the system just automatically calculates whether you've hit your daily or weekly cap, simply through your paying via your contactless bank card. And there's absolutely no doubt that is part of or certainly one of the reasons why people find it very easy to navigate public transport in London. We want to replicate that and to see that replicated outside of London. Bringing together data, particularly rail data with bus data, will also be key. So better access to journey planning, and also looking at new models. So for example, you can see that in areas like Solent, they're doing some really exciting work to pilot new types of journey planners that integrate journey planning and ticketing, like the Travi solution that's actually been behind the really successful Jelby solution that was launched in Berlin. And what that does is gives the local authority far more control over the management of their public transport networks, and the access to journey planning data and ticketing, and then the ability to reuse that data as part of network planning. So, some really exciting pilots happening as well. And then beyond the journey planning and the ticketing components, there are also this kind of, I suppose, at the heart of it all, if you've got 37 or more local authorities all setting out their plans to deliver an enhanced partnership, they need a way of evaluating whether their enhanced partnership is working and whether they are improving their journey times and improving their journey speeds, and whether the cost of their tickets are coming down and so on. And so the data that we'll be capturing through the service will actually be key to telling local authorities and helping them evaluate whether they are delivering better bus services as a result. I think other areas, so actually if we just go to the next slide, so just to give you an idea of some of the projects that we're working on and delivering to enable local authorities and bus operators to meet some of the commitments in the National Bus Strategy. So the bus operators have already been mandated to openly publish their fares data. So that is key, and we are encouraging them to start to look at moving towards zonal and flat fares. And you'll actually see in the bus service improvement plans that local authorities and operators are actively encouraged to introduce initiatives like the flat fare, because the simplification of fares it's key as a building block to multimodal ticketing, but it's also about enhancing the passenger experience and just making it much simpler for people to understand how to use buses and what it's going to cost them. We've also encouraged the provision of new products, so in particular flexible carnet products, and we see that as key to essentially what we're calling the green recovery post-COVID. So you're bearing in mind that once the worst of COVID has passed, there's a very strong possibility that many people just will not return to a 4 or 5 day working week in the office again, and that they're much more likely to do 2 to 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, and they will need products and tickets that cater to that new way of working. Other initiatives are through the COVID Bus Service Support Grant. We have essentially enabled operators to claim the cost of new and upgraded contactless ticket machines as an operational expense. And so we see that as a building block towards multimodal contactless CAT ticketing. So lots of work underway to put in place these foundation layers for integrated data and integrated ticketing. We've just recently completed a consultation on the ticketing block exemption, which is the legislation that enables bus operators and public transport operators to be exempted from the Competition Act 1998, to enable them to cooperate and collaborate on revenue share for multi-operator, multimodal ticketing. So again, at heart of it all, everything that we're doing through the programme is about the integration of data and the integration of ticketing, because we strongly believe that whilst public transport as a network is inherently fragmented, the people will use it if they feel it is integrated and they can complete their journeys seamlessly. And the way to do that is through integrated journey planners, integrated ticketing, and also ultimately through interchanges and through integrated transit. And that's how you knit together an otherwise distributed public transport network to create a positive passenger experience. So that's
Mira, there comes a point in any event like this where somebody like me says, I'm very conscious of time. So yeah. I want to skip to your last slide very quickly so we have time to hear from Andy. There we go. That's what people on the call need to see, where to get access to this, and in particular, that link, that first link up there, Bus Open Data. Mira, tell us just very quickly, what are people going to see if they go to at Bus Open Data?
If you go to the Bus Open Data service, so any app developers or any local authorities wanting to use the data, if you just type into Google find bus data, that'll take you to the Find Bus Open data site, and you can download our data. So you can download it in TransExchange, or you can download it in GTFS. If you're an app developer, you're going to want the GTFS, most likely. That's what we find. If you're a local authority, if you send us an email, and we can send you a link to the Analyze Bus Data service, and that really, rather than giving you the raw data, that starts to give you the intelligence or the insights that can be generated from the data, and that's far more useful for a local authority staff member. So that's what I suggest. And then you can follow us on Twitter. So we've got the hashtag BusOpenData, and we're on the handle at BusOpenData, and we're always tweeting updates and links, etc. there too. But we'll always be happy to provide a demo or to talk to anyone who wants to know a bit more about the service.
Great stuff. And in seamless Radio 4 style, I'm going to go from the access to the Bus Open Data to Andy, who has definitely been accessing Bus Open Data. You can say something about how the use of that data, and I think particularly, Andy, the raw data, can be of value to people dealing with traffic management more generally, not just the scheduling and policies. So Andy, over to you. And thank you, Mira.
Absolutely. So hopefully you can see my slides. So as you know me, very much involved in transport technology from the signal side. So when we started to hear about BODs, we started to look at the data. I've been talking to a number of local authorities recently, and on the transport traffic side rather than the public transport side, and the answers have been, what's BODs? And is BODs live yet? And is anyone doing anything with it? So the answers are, hopefully Neera's explained that, yes, since February, and here's what I'm going to show you what we've been doing with the data. So for those of you who want to know about the detail of the data, you can get bus fares, bus timetables, bus locations, which is the meat and to veg for us, and they're in real time and they're updated typically between 15 and 30 seconds. You can get punctuality and adherence to timetables, and they analyze the analytics of that, as Mira's just said, from the ABOD system. And it's important to say that current data has been designed to meet the user needs for calculating bus punctuality, but we're sort of exploring that as we go. So what does it look like? Well, you've got this Analyze BOD service where you can look at, which is an extension to the data, and it's doing all the dashboard and feeds monitoring and on-point analysis. And there's going to be other features in the year. But what I'd like to talk to you about is using BODs in traffic analysis and controllers, what we used to call probe vehicles. And we've got a massive data set that's free and freely published, and it's real time, so why wouldn't we use it? So we're using it as part of the SBRO Path project, which is DFT funded. So we're using it to look at other use cases, such as looking at optimizing traffic signals. So we're working with INRIX, and they ingest data from commercial telematics providers to look at delays to them. So we've started to use the bus data, but we acknowledge clearly that buses move in a different way from other vehicles. They stop at places called bus stops. Oh, that's handy because we've got a data file with all the bus stops in. And we've been looking at that for York and some other local authorities. So the way you do that is you say, tell me in a box all of the movements around that, which you can define as something like OpenStreetMap. And if the bus goes outside that boundary, then you don't get the points outside the boundary. But if you know the bus routes that you want, the number 10, every city seems to have a number 10, then you can query those as well. So what we do is we deduplicate the points because some of them have not changed the points, particularly if the bus has stopped. And then a point, I'll show you later, a map which shows the movement of the vehicle along the road. And we've got a kind of website where you can zoom in and see more and more points, and we use something called Mapbox for that. And the journey IDs are provided by the bus operator, but there's not a unique ID, so we have to think about that. But the good thing is that some data is available for occupancy from some buses, so we can tell not only was it on time, but how full it was. And we've been using this in a project which those of us who were born in the 60s and 70s have called the Bus Use Traffic Light Enabled Reporting, or BUTLER, for those of you who remember, on the buses. So what does data look like? So this is something from York that we access from BODs. So what I'd like to show you there is these are a whole load of waypoints that my colleague John Wade has plotted on a website. And the latency of that data is sort of between 60 and 25 seconds. So it was recorded at a point, and then sort of 16 seconds later, it's arrived on the website and then into our reading of that website. So it's pretty good, considering it's free and national and available. And what we've done there is we've just plotted the movement of the vehicle. And if you zoom in, you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And of course, at some point, you start getting lots and lots of points join over with one another. Well, that's a bus stop. You also get them wandering around a bit because we don't, unlike SatNav, snap them to the road map. But that's a challenge to do for the future. But I think we're pleased to say we've looked at quite a few towns and cities, and BODS is a good data source for monitoring vehicles going along the road in terms of congestion. So what do we do with it? First thing is we're looking to see if bus priority is working as planned. So we would miss BODS data and non-bus data, floating vehicle data, and then we can track the vehicle path through junctions and the impact on other vehicles, or hopefully lack of it. So we're looking at this within RICS to look at that as an additional feed for real time alongside their real time probes. So you could mix with other vehicles and buses, but you know, this is the bus data and this is the other vehicle. And this is what we call a curtain bead diagram, which some of you have seen before, which is this is the path of a vehicle along, this is distance along the road and this is time. So these are cars that are going on the road. We expect a bus would look something like that, where it stops and then starts moving again. We could colour them differently, but we could identify buses in the ideal traffic stream. And we do that with BODS. We know which bus it is, we know which bus route. So there's a way there we can start looking to see performance of a network, including other traffic, impact of buses on other traffic, impact of other traffic on buses. And the problem, of course, is that buses stop, but they stop at bus stop locations. So, hey, we've got a data set for that. We know where they should stop, but where are they not stopping where they shouldn't do? So we're looking at that. So that's one of the use cases that we're exploring. The second is because it's effectively subject to some technical limits, free data and fill your boots, the idea you could do some sort of big data AI approaches, which is different to the analyzed BODS data service, because you'd be looking at it from a traffic point of view rather than a performance of the bus point of view. And by mixing these data for buses and normal vehicles, you could have some sort of heat map and some kind of historic versus real-time performance metrics, all of which are possible. We haven't thought about them in detail yet, but just excited to start accessing this massive data set that's updated and is quite timely. And as BODS develops over time, you can start thinking about that for real-time priority. You can think about it with integration with connected intelligence transport systems. The world is the oyster. We've just skimmed the top at the moment and what to do with BODS data. So the answer for traffic engineers is yes, it does exist. Yes, it's open. Yes, you can use it. And yes, you should start playing with it, particularly because it's for your, you've taken the challenge of getting data out of vehicles, which has always been one in the past. So if you want to find help, if you're from the traffic signals world of the room, then look at the Arctic website, because obviously they're the experts in all this and they've been fully involved in developing all the ideas. If you want to, the guidance on the requirements for the data is on that website that Nira mentioned earlier on. And if you want to email me with anything or any help about what we've been doing, how we can access the data, I'm more than happy to help. What I'd say, it's early days. We only started a month or so ago. Some of the data is a bit mixed. Some of the data is really, really good. But it's a huge, great data set. And if you're an academic, or if you're a researcher, then there's got to be a good couple of PhDs in using all that data set. I really, really think so. So that's enough from me. I think there's left some time for some questions. But anyway, that's what traffic signal engineers could do with bus data. Let's try and bash down that silo between buses and traffic signals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Andy. And I'm sure that everyone from the TTF on this call is a regular reader of Highways magazine, the online magazine for the industry. Have a look at my column in the latest edition, which is very much about this, but about what are the data sets that we might be missing because they're not badged as traffic necessarily. This very much developed with a bus perspective, but clearly with many, many applications beyond the broad world, the narrow world of bus monitoring and bus specification.
Yeah.
We have got questions come in, and we haven't got a huge amount of time because I know people are scheduled to do other things from 5 o'clock. So I have a question. I just need to check. Mira, are you still with us?
Yes,
Because,
I'm still with you, Steve.
right, in that case, so one of the questions that's come into us, it's really about this of the departments when it comes to having London-style services in places where perhaps the vast majority of services that are run commercially, possibly by small companies, and with quite a limited density. So is the department's ambition realistic when you think about how many buses actually run? I'm thinking that the route that runs past my house, bus runs once every 2 hours, not on a clock face timetable. It's just not enough for me even to start thinking about checking whether it's on time or not. There just aren't enough of them to make it worth my while. So have we got the ambition wrong?
I mean, it's a good question, and I think you're right to say that there are differences in the way people travel between the major urban conurbations and rural environments. Would you still benefit from data and from information? I think there are still benefits to be had in the rural areas in terms of being able to access that data digitally. I think the value comes in the integration with other modes, because actually, that need to be able to plan your journey becomes even more important, and the need to make that connection between the other modes becomes even more important in those areas. But I think what it says to me is that when you go into the rural areas, I think in the major urban conurbations, if your bus is going to be late, you're probably going to hop on a tube or maybe the overground train or maybe light rail. When you're going to a rural area, well, actually, if you've got the bus and then the bus doesn't turn up or it's going to be late and there's only one bus every 25 minutes, what it says to me is that there is a need to then start thinking about how it integrates with other non-traditional modes or other modes that aren't strictly public transport, say for example ride hailing, etc. So I think the ambition is right, albeit the implementation will be quite different. One thing I would say is, I mean, this was one of the questions that we considered back in, or it must have been February 2020, so just before COVID. We did a roundtable with app developers, and in particular, we wanted to think about how we could make sure the benefits were delivered in rural areas, because we knew that the likes of Citymapper and Google were going to swoop in on the major urban conurbations. And one of the reasons why we've taken some of the decisions, for example, to provide packets of data as GTFS and to make the data as easily consumable as possible by not just the big app developers, but also the smaller app developers as well, is actually to ensure that some of those benefits can be realised in the rural areas and in the areas that won't necessarily be as well served by the biggest app developers. So I think the implementations will be different, but I think the need for data is ubiquitous, and it regardless of whether you're an urban dweller or people will increasingly rely on their phones. Okay, thank you. There's a question here. I'm going to put first up. I'm going to put Andy on notice. I'm going to come to you after I've put a question to Claire, Andy, which is going to be about what more, if anything, we could be doing through the Transport Technology Forum. I'm thinking through the Professional Institute that you and I both belong to. I'm hoping, I think I can see Darren Capes, the other side of the swimming pool. I'm more attention to his summer cocktail than he is to us, I'm afraid. But he's on the same floor of Great Minster House as the bus team. Whether there's more we can do ourselves to be spreading the word about this data set be out there. So have a think about that. But I'm going to come to Claire next, because one of the questions we've got here, Claire, is really, all of this is absolutely fine, but if you can't afford the fares on the bus, you're stumped in the first place. What can we say about the cost of using buses? How can it possibly be so much cheaper in London than it is in, say, Manchester?
Because it's massively subsidised in London. And all of us who live in London, whether we use the buses or not, man, woman and child are all paying a fairly hefty subsidy to TfL for it to deliver the pretty amazing service that we get. It's not practical. everywhere else. It might be practical in some places, but I'm sure Manchester's going to find out just how practical it is when it starts implementing its franchising schemes. So I think one of the problems is, and we're talking about access again, if you haven't got access to some sort of digital means of buying tickets, then you tend to get the cash fare on the day at best as your price. All the good deals, as in every other domestic service, tends to be because you've got access to a direct debit option or an online special offer, all that kind of stuff. So we've spent a fair amount of time nagging operators around the country who at least do still take cash, which London bus travellers still can't do. They have brought it, or they're bringing it back to underground stations, but that's obviously not most people in London because the underground doesn't serve a lot of London. So what we've been talking about is having the ability to buy single fares without, there's a slight issue with this in that a lot of the grant making, the BSOG stuff, relates to the single fare on a bus, so that tends to be disproportionately higher than it needed to be. So we want people to have a fair access to a fare structure that makes sense, which isn't always the case, if I'm brutally honest, in some places. I think a lot of the commercial operators do their best, but I don't think they're all the way there yet from a consumer point of view.
A wise man once said, follow the money. So that point there about the relationship between the standard fare and the operator grant is certainly one I hope Miriam will take back to her colleagues, because I know Stephen Fiddler, who's a bright chap, despite what they say, the solution to that. Now, Andy, I said I was going to come to you. Obviously, my first question is, why aren't you wearing a Lando Norris t-shirt? But second, what more can we do to promulgate the availability of this fantastically rich data set amongst people who might just never think it was there?
Right. Despite being worn in Woking, it's because I'm a Mercedes fan. 4 things need to be done. First is RTIG, real-time information do some fantastic stuff on BODs. I've put the link on there. So if you're a practitioner in traffic data, you should be looking at what they've been doing. That's the first port of call. Second, I think in TTF, we run the Connected Vehicle Forum. I run that. What's a bus giving out BODs? Connected Vehicle. Very good example, massive level. We should be promoting that, and I'll be taking that on board. Third thing is I'm working on some guidance for local authorities that many of the people on the call have been helping us with about how to open up their data. This is a data set that's already opened up. You don't need to open up your bus data. You need to use the bus data that's been opened up for you. And finally, I think from the IET perspective, from the professional institutions, this is really exciting stuff. This is stuff where Britain leads the world. National open data for buses. We should be shouting from the rooftops about it. We should be challenging young people to do something exciting with the data. We should be getting PhDs looking at the data, and we should be thinking about how we can expand it into real-time optimization.
Excellent, Andy. Great ideas there. Thank you. And I think I'm going to wind up, not just by saying thank you, but I think Mira can leave this webinar with those words of Andy's ringing in her ears and to take back to her colleagues about leading the world. And, you know, we might not lead the world in football, but by goodness, there are some things this country can still do and do extraordinarily well. So let's shout from the rooftops when we're doing a good job. Thank you, Mira. That was really interesting. Thank you also to Claire for giving us the perspective from the users. And thanks, of course, to Andy for giving us that insight into how the data can be used, what different use cases might be, and what all of us, hopefully all of us on the call, might do to spread the word. Data's out there, now let's make some use of it. And on that bombshell, it's 5 o'clock, and I'm going to bring this webinar to an end. If you've enjoyed it, please tell your friends and your professional colleagues. There'll be another one along before too long. Thank you.